So it's funny, man. I've been following you for a while. I saw you on Jay Dyer's stuff.
Oh, okay.
I think it might have been the first one that you did with him. I don't know how many you've done so far.
I've done a few. Yeah, I did one probably the end of 2020.
Okay,
Somewhere in 2020.
that might have been it, man. But yeah, I saw
Yeah,
you on
talking about
there.
psychedelics and Timothy Leary and stuff like that.
That had to have been the one because I had just finished the Immortality Key,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's interesting
I
stuff.
hate that book.
Yeah, I heard you talk
Well,
about it a
we
little
can
bit.
get into it here in the podcast if you want.
Of course, man. I grew up Pentecostal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, North Carolina. I've been in LA for about 8 years now, but I grew up Pentecostal. I probably missed maybe 5, 6 Sundays my whole life until I turned 18. So
Wow.
and Sunday nights. Maybe I might have missed 9 Sunday nights. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Sunday night's not that important. But yeah, so I grew up fundamentalist, and it always gets a bad rap because there's sweet, sincere Christians within every denomination.
Right.
But when I got into philosophy and theology, I was a wrestling coach, and the head wrestling coach at the private Christian school was the head of the philosophy and theology department.
Oh, wow.
And so every day we would wrestle with the kids, coach for 2 hours, and then for 2 hours or maybe 3 hours after practice, we would sit down and talk about philosophy and theology.
Wow.
And I had no idea the richness of the church history and the theology that I was not privy to within the fundamentalist church. And it's sad because anything considered Catholic as a Protestant is a joke, simply based on the fact that you pray to Mary. Right? That's it. So it's like everything's poo-pooed that is associated with Catholicism. And I wish I would have had this guy in my life when I was younger, but God's timing is perfect. And I needed it. It was at the time where I really needed that richness that I knew was out there. I had this sense when I was younger, like that's out there, because I always gravitated towards the philosophy side of things. I loved Bruce Lee as a kid.
Oh yeah,
he was my idol. I think I've memorized that entire movie, Enter the Dragon.
Oh yeah,
and so I got into philosophy that way, and I always loved the Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and Psalms. Those were my 3 favorite books, and Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, wisdom literature.
Yeah, and so I always gravitated towards that, and then. I get into college, I had, I'm 34, so YouTube was 06, so the year I graduated high school. So you didn't have this access to information like we do now, like what you're creating and what Jay's creating. And so you just had to find it in a book. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that, dude? That's how it used to be not so long ago.
Right.
Isn't that crazy? So, so then I was like seeking. I was needing something, and I was on the verge of like atheism. I was agnostic, right, in a way, because my fundamentalist literal interpretation of every sentence in the Bible was not doing it for me.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I needed that poetic interpretation. I needed that metaphorical understanding of certain stories. And I didn't know that's what I needed. But then I met my buddy John, and he opened up that world to me, and I have been obsessed ever since in my own way.
Right.
You know what I mean? So when I saw you talking to Jay about psychedelics. I had just gotten into psychedelics in a therapeutic way.
Okay.
So like I said, I grew up Pentecostal, so I didn't have my first sip of alcohol until I was 21.
Okay.
So, I couldn't even say hell in the house.
Wow.
Stuff like that, little things like that people overlook, which can drive a man insane. And it does. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? Yeah. So that literal interpretation of the fundamentalist church is something that is near and dear to my heart because I sympathize with those people. And like I said, there's a lot of good-hearted Christian people within that denomination. in evangelical denominations that that need a little bit more, just to enjoy their life a little bit. Like, not saying hell. Like, man, saying hell every once in a while is pretty fun. Like, what the hell? I mean, but like that was how extreme it was.
Right.
You know what I mean? So then when I got out to LA, I started. I couldn't sleep in my 20s. Stressed out, anxiety, not where I wanted to be. All the stuff in your 20s where you're like, people are thinking I should be here, and
Right.
I'm not there yet. You're so egotistical.
Right.
And I couldn't sleep, so I tried sleeping pills for like, I don't know, a month, and I just felt like a zombie.
Oh,
You know what I
geez.
mean? And
Right.
I was like, I can't do that. I got to work out. Like, I got to stay in shape. Like, and at that time I was training like MMA and still coaching wrestling and stuff. And and I moved out to LA, and I waited 2 years. I got my card. I got my medical card.
Okay.
I was like, trying to be as
Yeah.
legal as I could about it. And I smoked, and that helped me sleep.
Uh-huh.
And then I was like, oh, well, maybe it's not as damning as I thought it would be. And then I got into psychedelic therapy research, and
Well,
I
what
started
psychedelics specifically? Psilocybin, MDMA?
both of those.
Both those.
Yeah. And so I started microdosing psilocybin first, and I felt, a lot of benefits anxiety wise, and depression wise. And then I did an MDMA therapy session, and that
Okay.
I would say that's the greatest thing I've ever done for myself. But I have a background as a Christian. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And I think this is where what our conversation can get really interesting. And I
Okay.
want to hear your thoughts on this. I find that people, and I don't know what your background is. I should have asked this before I state this statement. But I think a lot of people without a religious background find psychedelics and find that it's the doorway to understanding themselves, or maybe the universe, or a combination of both. And I didn't have that, so my identity and my worldview has been shaped through my Christian beliefs,
Right.
before the psychedelics. And so I, like I said, I did psychedelics in a therapeutic way, and that has actually made my relationship with God better, if that makes any sense to you. But what I've found is a lot of people who are into psychedelics had no authority in their life before, never, and that's growing up in a religious household. There is something greater than you. There's something objective. There's a moral objectivity to existence that you have to somehow subdue yourself under, and say, hey, my will is not always going to be the best in every situation. So I have a lot of sympathy for both sides. Religious people who are against some type of psychedelic therapy, if it's good for them, if it's best for them. And then also for people who had no religious background and then got into psychedelics and then kind of assume that is the doorway and everyone else is dumb or uninformed. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, I kind of see the dichotomy that you're laying out there.
Yeah. What do you think about
Are
that?
you? My general thoughts are the reasons why something like a traditional church like Orthodoxy would perceive psychedelics to be nefarious or something that we need to be very cautious about has to do with our concepts of inebriation, intoxication, and specifically psychedelics, of how it opens you up to another realm. And so we don't deny, and just for clarity for anybody listening, before I got into Orthodoxy or Eastern Orthodox Christianity, throughout my 20s, I have been pursuing a PhD in religious studies. So my undergraduate was focused on like East Asian studies. My master's was focused on early Christianity, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, psychedelic shamanism. And during that whole time, and even going into my PhD, which focuses more on what I deem technologies of transcendence, talking about psychedelic substance and how that relates to transhumanism and the perception of material technologies transcending reality for a sense of self-divinization. So I'm quite familiar with psychedelics, done a lot of psychedelics, was a large proponent of psychedelics before I got into orthodoxy. And we can even talk about how researching the psychedelic references of to like Amanita muscaria mushrooms and psilocybin mushrooms and stuff like that, how they're present in various Christian frescoes, and the theories about Jesus being a mushroom, all that different stuff. But in regards to what you laid out, um, psychedelic therapy, or using like MDMA, obviously is a less radical substance than the tryptamine substances. And I agree with Terence McKenna on a few topics. One being that psychedelics dissolve boundaries, and that's really the point of them. And so if you have a sort of PTSD or some type of an emotional barrier, can you take these boundary dissolving substances in regards to your phenomenological experience, your experience of reality, and acquire positive benefits? Yeah, I think if you do have PTSD or various emotional traumas, at the same time, from a spiritual perspective, because that's a psychoanalytic perspective, from a spiritual perspective, you're also opening yourself up, whether it be in a medical clinical scenario, whether it be at an ayahuasca ceremony, whether it be in your bedroom smoking DMT. Um, you're opening yourself up to a real reality and real entities. So I'm a sort of psychedelic realist in that sense of having traveled some of those realms. The question is, what are you interacting with, and how do you know any of your experiences to be true? And that's really the fundamental crux of the psychedelic phenomenon is, how do you know your experience to be true? Because it's a subjective reality when we're talking about going into those deep
Right.
waters. And we can perceive various truths or synchronicities, or what, as a Christian, I would call a providence, God's will. It's a meeting of my will with God's will. Um, but we can talk about how those may become apparent on, again, as you dissolve boundaries, certain things may emerge that you aren't totally conscious of. But in regards to within a Christian context, I really don't see psychedelics being something that can be incorporated into sort of Christian spirituality or a Christian religious understanding, because uh, ultimately it leads to a totally different spiritual and religious paradigm. And one being the dissolution of boundaries and the phenomenological experience that psychedelics induce, whether it be 5-MeO, ayahuasca, psilocybins, the LSDs of the world, is that there is like a total unity. And this, we can get into then the philosophy and the theology of how this leads to the privileging of unity over multiplicity, which is a
I love that
problem
video.
historically within philosophy. And this
I
is a
love that video
Platonic,
you made.
yeah.
That was so
And so
good,
this is
man.
a Platonic leanings of spirituality, where we're trying to move back to a sort of ideal pure unity. And this is, I would say, a sort of rhetoric that has been hijacked for demonic purposes. So me as a Christian, I believe that the world's going to get worse, and we're going to move closer and closer towards what we would perceive the end times. When that is, I'm not going to say. That's, as an Orthodox Christian, for the church to declare. But um, our eschatology, our understanding of this pure unity is a sort of moving in towards a total authoritarian, tyrannical nightmare. It's a demonic reality that's going to emerge, a sort of antichrist figure, who I believe personally that, and I've talked with priests about this, that I believe to be the total inversion of Christ, where Christ is fully God, fully man. That is the sort of hypostatic union of the God man. That the Antichrist will be a sort of blending of fully machine, fully man, and that he will be a full sort of transhumanist figure, and he will be worshipped as a god. And so I think psychedelics actually totally lead people into that paradigm, because the basis of the epistemology of how do you know something to be true when you take psychedelics is going to be totally based on your experience, because fanciful things happen, things that are totally outside the bounds of ordinary cognition. So you're not using just straightforward logic. There's a mixture and confluence of high emotional energy, visual cues, visual aesthetics, all this stuff's going on. So I think what it does is it leads people then to privilege their own experience as being true over maybe more traditional approaches like formal understandings of logic. And this then leads to me navigating the world by emotion, which I believe is a very dangerous way to go about navigating the world, which I believe Christianity then is trying to tell people not necessarily to do.
Right.
Um, and so if we're totally led by our emotions, then our pleasures, this demonic system is going to lure us like a donkey with a carrot back into this privileging of unity over multiplicity, which I think is the demonic process that we're really up against in the world. So it's a very tricky question.
Yeah.
I brought in a lot of things there when you're talking about psychedelics, because can they help people? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Have I done them? Yes. Um, can they hurt people? Yes. Do they open you up to a real reality, or is this stuff just in your imagination? No, I believe they're actually real. I believe there's a real spiritual underlying there, and I believe that God can meet people there. So I think that Christ and God can do anything. It is the true God. So even if there are demonic entities or entities that we would certainly not support as
Right.
being messengers of God within the psychedelic realm, that doesn't mean that positive things can't occur. But do I think that taking psychedelics is a way to move closer to God's will? I do not. And so that's kind of my take on go
Yeah.
wherever you want to go from there.
Yeah, man. So when you got into psychedelics, what were your experiences like? Because like I said, I've only microdosed psilocybin, and that's 100 to 300 milligrams of psilocybin. This is so small, right?
Right.
There's
That's
no
tiny.
hallucinatory effects at all. So I've never tripped on mushrooms. So my experience compared to your experience is completely different. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So when I was in my 20s, I started to really get into about the time I went to China twice. So I was really interested in Taoism and Chinese forms of Buddhism. And so went there to study Mandarin at a university. And around that time, I was also getting interested in psychedelics, particularly listening to a lot of Terrence McKenna and Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary. And so my approach to psychedelics was not um, a medically oriented process. It was purely for the purposes of what I perceive to be the leading frontier of the religious phenomenon. Because I study religion. That's what I do, and so I perceive myself as being a sort of in the very leading edge of the historical enterprise of trying to understand what's going on, and that these psychedelic substances were not only the origin and source of what religion comes from, but then now in the 20th and 21st century is going to be the doorway back to a sort of utopia. That was my perception, and so
Yeah.
I went really hardcore. So I'm talking anywhere between the sort of 5 grams in silent darkness up to 5 to 8 grams of psilocybin, anywhere between 2 to 10 hits of acid, liquid acid, gel tablets, going to raves, smoking DMT as much as I can get my hands on. So I was interested in going into the deepest waters possible, because I thought that the deeper I went, the more of a sort of connecting of dots, or maybe from a Buddhist context, a sort of minor Satori experience I would have. And I felt like when I came out, then I could piece things more and more together. And I was pretty intent on that for multiple years. And it wasn't until at the end of my master's degree that one of my DMT experiences and LSD experiences, what I believed was about to happen in my life, and all this insight and gnosis, this knowledge that I was acquiring, didn't come true. And that slowly sort of caused a fracture in this idea that the psychedelic experiences I was having, which was a totalizing understanding of my reality, wasn't actually matching on then to reality itself that I'm having to deal with and get a job and do XYZ. So
What was that
um
specific thing,
go
if you don't
ahead.
mind? What was that specific thing that didn't happen like you had envisioned,
Yeah.
if
So
you don't mind me asking?
I smoked DMT one time during my master's degree, and had a very vivid experience. One was a sort of like a 1950s diner, and the wall was a sort of spinning galaxy. And the archetype of the time traveler, I don't know if you're familiar with that. If you were to put that in a search engine, you would see that it would be a sort of man with a top hat, dressed in a two-piece, maybe a three-piece suit with a briefcase or something. And it's a sort of anonymous face, but this sort of business-like 1920s figure. is sort of archetype for the time traveler. And when I was in this diner, that's the type of people that were coming in and out of this sort of spinning galaxy on the wall. And I was sitting there, and it was very, very real. And then from there, it took me to this sort of like visual, sort of emotional, cognitive realization that I was going to get into the University of Chicago for my PhD in religious studies. And the University of Chicago, generally speaking, is considered like the top university for religious studies. University of Chicago was the first place you had the field of religious studies, and that's where the World Religions Fair occurred in like the end of the 19th century. So I was at the University of Illinois, had this experience, and was totally convinced that I was going to get in. Now, I applied, didn't even apply to some of these other schools, didn't get in, um, and had to eventually go sell cars for a year, and then got into Berkeley, the GTU, the Graduate Theological Union, where I was wanting to do research on people who claim to be spiritual but not religious, and why they appropriated certain religious symbols, why Buddha heads, why Ganesha, why Christ or Christ conscious. So that's what I went, and I was a non-believer at the time. That then led to my first semester doing research on a book called the Psychedelic Gospels, which is interested in evidence of Amanita muscaria and various psilocybin type mushroom frescoes present within southern France, Germany, northern Italy, and Turkey. And the author was making the claim that this was the sort of secret Eucharist of the Christian tradition, and that the sort of sacramental wine and bread was a sober, false Eucharistic tradition. And so I was a non-believer, very much interested in psychedelics, had a YouTube channel, thriving YouTube channel promoting all that stuff. And I dove into it and realized that all the evidence was obviously historically contextualized. It all existed between the 900s and the 1300s. And deeper research led to me realizing that a group called the Cathars, which was a Gnostic heresy that emerged during this time, during the medieval period, right in that area. And then even during the Inquisition, when the sort of killing of the Albigensians, these were a sort of Cathar community. So the Inquisition was a way to sort of put down this stuff. And that's why you don't see it after the 1300s, because things like the leader of the Knights Templar was killed right in the first decade of the 14th century, so the 1300s there. And that's what eventually led, side note, but it led then the Templars moving north and establishing itself as Scottish Freemasonry. And so you see that then emerge within that later half of the 14th century into the 15th century. Anyways, that's a digression. But the looking into the psychedelic gospels led to this research and looking at these sort of Gnostic heresies, which then has led into further research of myself, looking into the use of mushrooms within Gnosticism. And so John Marco Allegro, the famous linguist dealing with some of the dead languages around the Mediterranean, made the claim in The Sacred Cross and the Mushroom that Jesus Christ himself was a mushroom. Now, nobody has came and validated that book, and so it's still sort of a mantra amongst the psychedelic community to always reference John Marco Allegro and Christ was a mushroom, even though at this point, 21st century biblical scholarship, many non-believers now, the majority of atheist scholars agree that Jesus of Nazareth was a historical person, that Christianity was founded on this, but they don't believe he was God. They don't believe in the miracles and all this different stuff. They think this was just the explanation because that's what the evidence points for. And so there's been nobody regarding, and John Marco Allegro was a Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, but everybody kind of condemned him when he came out with this book. But that's still, again, a mantra, the immortality keys, basically, of the same idea. And that book is, in my opinion, as an academic, a real joke. To take seriously this talking about multiple religious traditions, the nuance there is just not there at all. But looking into these Gnostic traditions, I do believe that they were using psychedelics as the Eucharist. And I've, in other research I've done for my program, looked at Hippolytus and Irenaeus and looking at a lot of these early church fathers talking about the Gnostics. And you do find absolutely instances of them drinking certain potions for inebriating intoxications, for certain rituals, for group sex. And this is known amongst the various Gnostic groups. So my conclusion then came that maybe in the East, in Russia, because there's books, for example, from R. Gordon Wasson and his wife um, Valentina Pavlovna. They wrote a book called Russia, Mushrooms and History, or Russia, History and Mushrooms, or something like that. But it talks about the linguistic connection of Slavic languages to mushroom picking, or they would call it was a mushroom philic condition culture. So Slavic cultures, generally speaking, it's not uncommon for grandmothers to take their granddaughters to the woods to pick wild mushrooms, tell them which species, what type of cuisines to cook it with, and all this different stuff. And so they have tons of words for mushrooms, whereas in English you do not find that. However, in French and Italian, you do find many more words for mushrooms than, say, in German or English. Anyways, that obviously relates to some of the fresco stuff, but the book Russia, Mushrooms and History showed that Slavic languages are much more mushroom philic. So I thought, oh, well, if I go look at the Eastern Orthodox Church and theology, I bet in their iconography I'll find more evidence of the mushroom frescoes I found in these Gnostic communities in Western Europe. Fast forward, I then learn about church history. I then learn about the theology, and I already had a background in philosophy. So then learning about what I call, and what I do now, and why we're having this conversation, is due to my now newer YouTube channel called Church of the Eternal Logos, where I use the Logos theology of Eastern Orthodoxy then to analyze and talk about various topics or current events and stuff like that. So fast forward, took that class, learned that theology, was a non-believer, and then slowly but surely diving deeper into that reality, eventually my heart was converted along with my mind. And by the end of 2018, on 11/11/18, I gave my life to Christ, and been Eastern Orthodox, or at least pursuing that, and then eventually got brought into the church. So long roundabout story, but I'm sure
Yeah, I
anybody
love
listening,
it, dude.
that's
I
going to give a
loved it.
little bit more of a context of how I know so much about all this mushrooms and psychedelic stuff and how it relates to Christianity.
Yeah, man, I love that story. So you became a Christian in 2018.
Well, I grew up Methodist, though. So I grew
Okay.
up in a conservative Methodist.
What was
And
that
then
like?
it was good. I mean, all my family was all Methodist. My dad's family has a long line of Methodist pastors, and
Oh, okay.
always went to
Interesting.
church. Yeah, I went to church pretty regularly when I was a kid, part of the church. And then I remember in high school, um, I wanted to be more involved. Was still pretty involved in my church, and then went to college. That's when I really
Yeah.
got into like pot smoking and stuff like
Okay.
that. Didn't play basketball. Originally, I went to a small D3 school to play basketball, but I had a heart murmur, couldn't play right away. Really didn't fall in. I kind of fell out of love with basketball and the whole process, and
It's
so
easy, man.
I just didn't even. I just decided I was just going to quit, and so I transferred to IUPUI, which is Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and just started taking all that energy that I devoted towards athletics, and I sort of began to redirect it towards academics, and it reformed a new identity of myself. So before I graduated high school like a 2.6 GPA. I
Yeah.
tested into some some AP English or
Yeah,
AP
yeah.
history and stuff like
Right.
that, but I did
Yeah.
not care about school at all. It was just girls and sports, and so
Got it.
it wasn't until sports were no longer there that I sort of had an identity crisis. That led to then like devoting myself to my studies, and then acing all my classes, and then becoming a biology major, and then acing all those classes and doing better than some of the pre-med students, and seeing, wow, if I have a skill at, if I devote myself to something, I can become good at anything. That was the self-confidence I had, and that sort of set a domino effect of doing better at school, deciding to then become a biology major, then a double major in religious studies, then I wanted to compete in Taekwondo. I was doing that, and then I wanted to go to China, so I decided to learn Mandarin. And I was a minor, and then I turned that into a certificate. Went to China twice, and so I just kept doing this stuff, just adding more and more things because I felt like it was my own discipline and my own will that like I could, in a sense, learn or conquer anything I wanted to. And so that has then been a journey throughout my 20s, which then involved all the psychedelics, all the drugs. We can get into magic, all that type of stuff, which then eventually led back to orthodoxy. And so it was that first semester when I was 19 when I took an introductory to Bible class, and learned about a lot of these scholastic and academic criticisms regarding biblical scholarship. And so looking at the multiple authors theory, looking at the book of Gilgamesh, looking up
Right.
how all this stuff ties together. And that really shook this sort of naive Christian Methodist. So by the time I was done with that semester, I was like, well, I guess I can't really be Christian. And
Right.
so that's when it got me into like being spiritual. And then I was taking the religious studies courses. And then I learned about Buddhism and Taoism, and Eastern mysticism just really enthralled me. And so that's
Yeah.
an easy gateway into psychedelics and Eastern mysticism.
Interesting.
Those things
Okay.
kind of go together.
So it was that Bible class that really kind of shook the foundation of your faith in a way?
Yeah, because I just learned so much that people didn't know, and then learning about a lot of the Gnostic
Within the
scripture,
Christian
like,
community, you're saying?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And so that was always a thing. That was a difficult thing for me, even until kind of encountering orthodoxy, is that I never envisioned myself coming back to Christianity because I had a background in like the Nag Hammadi scripture. So, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, all these different things, along with the four canonical Gospels. And so just knowing so much more than quote unquote believers doesn't ingratiate one to like have this type of respect they should. And
Yeah.
so it wasn't until seeing kind of what you started off this podcast with, the complexity and the intellectual beauty of the Orthodox theology, that I could recognize as a religious studies scholar was unique amongst world religions. And even though as a religious studies scholar knew about Eastern Orthodoxy, I didn't know the theology in a way to put myself inside of it and then look back out into the world through it. And
Mm.
once I could do that, because I had learned so much about it, whether I believed it or not, I just saw how so many dots connected
Right.
that it had to be true. This had to
Yeah.
be truth, at least. And that's still my experience. And that's kind of then why I stopped with the psychedelic channel, which was titled Fractal Universe, like spelled YOUNIVERSE, like your universe.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
fractal, the idea that there's a sort of infinite representations of patterns at scale.
Right.
Um, and
That's
so
fascinating.
I'm sorry.
It's fascinating, man.
Yeah. So
I
then that
find
led
everybody.
eventually then to the new YouTube channel.
Yeah. No, I find everybody's journey to God very interesting because it's very similar, but yet also unique. And I it's funny. There's something about man. I don't know about why do you think most denominations of Christianity, the pastors of them, have no understanding of the depth of theology within the church?
Well, I think
Do you think they just get so focused on
it's
their
a big
specific
complex. I'm
denomination?
sorry. Go ahead. I
Sorry.
couldn't hear you.
Do
Go
you
ahead.
think it's just like this ultra specialization on the denomination itself and why it's different instead
That
of
certainly plays a factor in it. I would say that there's multiple sort of presuppositions that lay the groundwork for that to be a sort of cultural phenomenon. And
yeah,
so one being, um, obviously the papacy, I believe, is a total errancy. And
yeah,
so, as an Orthodox, obviously, Mary doesn't bother me, although I would say their veneration, just a quick little tidbit for the listeners, is that the reason why Catholicism uses statuary in their churches and the Orthodox Church, the original church of the first millennia, does not, is because the Eastern Orthodox continues the iconographical tradition that was present within the synagogues before Christ and after Christ into the church. So we paint our churches with icons. And then the Greco-Roman pagan empire was obsessed with the sort of realistic body statues. And so the Catholic Church is the continuation of the sort of Greco-Roman tradition of the aesthetic itself. So
Right.
side note there. But
Yeah.
um, the Protestant tradition, no matter what denomination you pick, already presupposes a sort of self-papacy. And so the papacy itself within the Catholic Church just has one pope and then an entire tradition. But unfortunately, Protestantism then has one pope and the person who then interprets the scripture. It could be Billy Bob at the Baptist church down the road. It could be, the Christ Church, the Unitarians, whatever it is. Well, what is ultimately true and how do we come to know it? These questions aren't ultimately asked. And I think so then in Western civilization runs a sort of sense of pride in oneself to then come to ultimate conclusions. And I think that is part of why magic and psychedelics and these sort of radical forms of mysticism are so popular in the West, because they lead to this idea that I myself as a man can do something and start to begin to elevate myself higher and higher and higher. And so whether that be I have a better interpretation than you do, even though I don't know Hebrew or can't read it in the traditional, the original Greek or nothing like that, or I don't even realize all the differences between the translations, but my interpretation is better than yours.
Yeah.
Or it leads to
a side note on that.
Ahead.
I had a buddy of mine I used to lift weights with back home, and he became a First Baptist pastor. And one day we were just lifting weights, and he was like, that Baptists were the first Christians. And I was like, where do we start with this conversation? Because I had no experience in any of the theology that I have now,
Right.
But that was just mind blowing to me. But that's a very common thing within those denominations, like you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and so that claim right there, he may have been very good-hearted and truly believed what he was saying. So then the problem is ignorance. And I would say that's another big one. So pride and ignorance are major blinders to one's perception. That's true for me right now, us all the time. That's part of the Christian life, then, is becoming more and more aware of that, so we can peel that off of our noetic lens that we're looking at the world.
Right.
And so you look, how many people even know about church history? How many people know about the councils? How many people even know that it's St. Athanasius standing up at the first council arguing, and basically split 40 in favor, 60 against, that Christ is fully God, fully man. And because of his rhetorical and his oration, standing up in front of all the bishops, convinced them that the logical conclusion of Christ and theosis, us being divinized by him and being a bridge into divinity, he would have to be fully God and fully man. And then making the Greek philosophical arguments of the hypostasis and scripture and all this different stuff. He convinced them. That was the first council. The entirety of Christianity then has the presupposition, of course, Christ is God.
Right.
Well, that was debated in the first council, and the majority of the church was Arian. And so people just don't know history. They don't know. They're ignorant. And that's also a choice in the information age. So I think within Orthodoxy specifically, in Christianity, generally speaking, within really, as you said, 2006 forward, if you want to know the truth, now you can get to it. Orthodoxy was one of the older religions to come to the United States. I mean, it already had Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam. They were already here before Orthodoxy. And so the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet Union and Russia is what propelled so many people to come to Alaska, which then eventually that brought in more Orthodox Christianity, specifically Russians. We had Greeks, in St. Augustine, Florida. It's the first Greek Orthodox church in the United States, but that wasn't like a mass phenomenon. There weren't tons of Orthodox Christians. That is a later phenomenon, really, with the Russians. And so Orthodoxy, interestingly, is the oldest form of Christianity. It's the true form for the first 1,000 years. The oldest dynastic kingdom in world history is the Byzantine Empire, an Orthodox Christian empire. And yet people in the West just have this belief that the Roman Empire ends and then you have Charlemagne. And that is a total incorrect understanding. Like the entirety of the Byzantine Empire is like left out of people's perceptions. And so I think people in the West are ignorant to history, And then there's a presupposition of a sort of self-pride that they're going to go about and sort of find the truth, discover the truth themselves, which is a sort of Gnostic impulse. And
Right.
so that's where my argument, my research in regards to transhumanism and it emerging as a spiritual paradigm, I think is incredibly American, because it's this idea that we're going to do it through our self-will. We're going to create it, technology, progress, the new frontier, all this different stuff. And I think this sort of carrot in front of a donkey, metaphorically speaking, is going to lead everybody to bring about, the destruction of everything that they actually care about.
Sure. Or imagine, or invisible carrot or non-existent carrot in front of a donkey, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be a metaverse.
Fake carrot. Yeah, metaverse carrot. Yeah. Well, see, man, that's why I find that what you're doing is so important, because you're opening up this conversation amongst Protestants, really. I mean, you probably have a lot of Catholics, whatever, but like, just coming from my background, like, every Christian who really does internalize the message of Christ is seeking the conversation that you have on your channel. I really do feel that.
I appreciate that.
I really do feel that, because it's true for me. And if it's true for me, it's got to be true for somebody else. You know what I mean?
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I do make a deliberate effort to not make it's not popular content. I make, for those listening, my average stream is at least an hour and a half. And I spend quite a bit of time before I even go live. And it is a sort of live ranting. It's all over the place, but they are sort of systematic and organized. And there's a thesis, there's an argument. And so it's long drawn out content for people who want to think about a topic. And so I have had Protestants and Catholics, but I tell you, the people that are the most emails that I get from my YouTube channel are the people into psychedelics and the people into the occult and the people into the New Age, because there's a sense, especially with the psychedelics, of, again, the self-pride is you really can't listen to somebody who hasn't done it. It's like somebody who's never had sex telling you about how bad sex is, and you've had sex and you're like, well, no, sex isn't, like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't, why would I listen to you? And that's how it is with psychedelics too, good or bad.
Right.
And so it takes somebody who's, oh yeah, I've done all that. Yeah, I've done that. Oh, you don't believe me? Well, here's a whole YouTube channel. Here's a whole life, a previous life I've lived, talking about all that stuff. And so then it's like, well, people can listen up. They may not agree at first, but then they see the consistency and the depth of conversation that I'm trying to bring about. Whether you want to talk about Jungian synchronicities, Jungian understandings of archetype, and how that relates then to the logos, Christ, the Word, the incarnation. Again, tying in Jordan Peterson. For me, it's like all this stuff. I can speak to all this stuff because orthodoxy is the truth. And so then the truth resonates at every single level, whether it's literal, whether it's metaphorical, allegorical, archetypal, It doesn't matter.
Yeah. And that's something that your regular Pentecostal pastor can't do. And I don't know if you're on TikTok, man, but the only reason I'm on TikTok is to build the YouTube channel, the podcast, and it's really helped. But
it's the only place for organic growth. All the other algorithms, I mean, TikTok's really degenerate, and it's a psychological weapon, obviously. But at the same time, I'm on TikTok. I just started a TikTok.
Oh, you did? Nice.
Yeah, because what I mean, if you're making content, not being on it isn't the solution. For me, in the way that the work that I'm trying to do for Christ, I feel like that's what my job is. My job is to like have one foot in the mud, like in the world. I'm not a monastic.
Oh yeah.
I am trying to speak to regular people, and especially young men. So it's like, well, where else am I going to do that other than TikTok? You got to get
exactly. Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking the other day, Joe Rogan's fan base. I mean, when we started listening to Joe Rogan, we were in our 20s, right?
Oh yeah.
He was 40. You know what I mean? It's like, it's weird. It's like you when you grow up, you kind of want like older men to like admire you, be like, hey, look, like, I got my shit together.
Right.
I'm one of you. And it's kind of like, you're never going to get that.
Right.
And then you only get it from like the younger people. Like I realized that when I was coaching wrestling, it's like those kids admired me. And I was like, oh, wow, they actually admire me for all the traits I thought I had that I don't get admiration from older men or whatever that, you try to win over. So it's like, it's funny how people find you, and you didn't know that was the group that you were talking to, or you were meant to
Right.
inspire, But I was on
Right.
TikTok, and I came across this Pentecostal pastor, man, and he was like speaking in tongues and and performing,
Right.
on TikTok, and I was like, wow. I was like, you know what? Thank God for TikTok, because it's going to expose this interpretation of Christianity as
hmm
bogus in some ways.
In other ways,
And it can be edifying.
as a scholar of religion, the fastest growing form of Christianity is Pentecostalism. So obviously, there's
Really?
Mormonism, which is ironically growing quite well.
Yeah.
Um, and then the fastest denomination, more so than Catholicism, more so than Orthodoxy, and it has to do with Pentecostals moving into places like Central America, South America,
Right.
Africa, and
That makes sense.
blending the charismatic attributes of the Pentecostal spirituality with traditional forms of magic and folk religion.
Mm.
And so, because they're doing that, Pentecostalism is absolutely spreading like wildfire across like Africa and South America, stuff like that.
Wow. That's fascinating, man. Because I remember in my Pentecostal church, they would do missions to India. India was the spot where they would
Yep.
go.
And that's where they want the more mystical the culture, the more susceptible people to are taking a liking to Pentecostalism, because this idea of they claim being possessed by the Spirit. Obviously, I don't agree with that analysis. Um, Places that are do that are going to be way more welcoming to that, and some people may get like that flavor a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. I mean, every Sunday people were speaking in tongues. My pastor was speaking in tongues every Sunday. So it's a very common thing for me. And when
hmm
when you say that to somebody, they're like,
Excuse me.
wow, okay, this guy's crazy. Like, he grew up in a cult. And it's like, yeah, in a way, yeah, I did grow up in a cult. I mean, I
Mm,
really do look at the Pentecostal church as a cult.
yeah.
Um, but it's kind of like if you had a horrible basketball coach, right? Who just made basketball hell, right? And you're like, I fucking hate basketball. Basketball's the devil. Like, I'm never playing basketball again. And it's like, is it basketball or was it the coach?
Right.
You know what I mean? So a lot of people, I find that within the Pentecostal church and a lot of evangelical denominations, they leave that because of that bad experience, and they shun it for 10, 15 years until they have kids, and they're like, you know what? My kids are amazing. I thank God every day. You know what? I do believe in God. It's like,
Right.
man, like, you didn't have to lose 15 years of your spiritual growth. There's
Yeah,
there's
I do
another
think.
way of perceiving your relationship with God.
Yeah, I and you would be able to speak to this better than I can, but at least in my life, it's been funny that I do not force Christianity or Orthodoxy on all my friends or the people generally around me day to day.
Yeah.
Um, But my friends who have had kids, and specifically the mothers, way way more likely to adopt Christianity and become seekers, like actually
Yeah.
reading, learning, investigating. Now that's also happened for some of the guys I know, and maybe even opening themselves up to orthodoxy or becoming a little bit more interested. But in regards to the close sphere of my own circle, multiple of my buddies who are sort of new age in the same place I was at, and that's why we were all friends and stuff like that. Their wives, as they've got married and now have kids, become overt Christians, get baptized in maybe a Protestant church, but they're going deeper. They're on their own journey, and that's the thing. Is the quest is like you have to actually have the desire to like know what is true, whether you are a believer now or not. Maybe you're into Buddhism, but it's literally wanting to know what's true and then doing the hard work.
Yeah.
Whatever the work is that you think you have to do, well, then do it so then you can get to the next point and see the next stepping stone, see the next place. And for me, that eventually led back to orthodoxy. And that's what's been so interesting because I do one-on-ones is the depth of experience. Almost everybody I've talked to that as adults that have converted to orthodoxy, whether it be that they were magicians, overt ritualistic magicians,
Yeah.
witchcraft, whether they were psychonauts like myself, whether they spent 3 years in Tibet or whatever they did, lived in India, that everybody um, has a sort of depth to it. And then there's other people that are just like born Christian, Protestant, or whatever, and they've just pursued Christ more and more and more. And now they're 25 and they've figured out church history and theology. Now they know all about orthodoxy. And so then there's another person, but you still, there's so much depth to even that person. They don't have
Yeah.
tons of life experience per se, but their knowledge of faith and Christ, it is very extraordinary for their age. And so I found within Orthodoxy, it definitely attracts an individual with depth, who wants to take that whole journey on. And that, I think, has been really interesting and a characteristic that I've really yet to see fail in regards to people that are really taking it all to their heart.
I believe that, man, because like if you're wanting to, like I did in my 20s, seek the depths of an understanding of God that we have within the history of the church, then you can find it, right? And when you find it, it kind of becomes a drug in a way.
Yeah.
Just I love listening to conversations about philosophy and theology. Because that's what, like I said, that's what I did when I was coaching wrestling. We would just sit after just soaking wet from practice and just talk for hours. And I was a film major in school, so I had my concentration was in screenwriting. So my brother and I write, and he's a published author, and he's published. He's been published probably about 30 times now. It's just short stories and stuff. And he just signed with an agent for his first novel, which is based upon a Pentecostal pastor in the South.
Wow.
Have you read Flannery O'Connor?
Well, yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay. Yeah, Southern Gothic. That's how my brother writes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's dude, you love it. I will have to send you a copy when it comes out. But we and the coach he loved movies too, and he loved stories, and just talking about that stuff is just. I mean, when you want something and you get a little, and you find, and you've been starving for it, and you finally get a little, you're like, oh man, just give me more. I did not know how sickly I guess I was when it came to my spiritual growth. And you really don't understand that until you're hit by something that you're like, oh, okay, I think I've been doing something wrong here. I need to switch perspectives. And within the fundamentalist church, it's very focused on moralism, right? And it's like, don't do these things instead of this is what you get to do. You know what I mean? And I always found that to be okay up until I became a man.
Right.
And then it's like, all right, what do I do here? And you're not getting any answers to that really from the majority of your churches.
Right. Well, there's no real tradition. I would argue, as a man specifically, you look at Protestantism, generally speaking, everybody over the age of like 35, the vast majority of the adherents are going to be women. And so Protestantism, generally speaking, this has also been a big problem with the African American community, which are obviously Protestants. They have their own sort of their own version, but young, black men just don't go to church. And I would argue that why then that's obviously the opposite within Orthodoxy. You can listen to any priest, you can go to any Orthodox church. You're going to see a lot more young men actually go to Orthodoxy. And I think it's because of the traditionalism and the patriarchy, is that men actually thrive in a patriarchy. You were talking about looking for the approval of older men, and then the younger men idolizing you and basically looking for your approval, like you're looking for the people above you. And so men, we sort ourselves out way better than women sort us out in a way.
Right.
And so men who are respected by other men definitely are going to have a higher status in society, and women are going to be more attracted to them because they're already approved by other men.
Yeah.
And so that is a huge part of whatever we do as men, whether you do construction, whether you're a lawyer, whether you are on a sports team, whatever it is, you have to be around men. Men have a different culture amongst men, you know. And so we look at then that society and Protestantism, generally speaking, has no real patriarchal tradition. Now, it has been an offshoot, and I can understand the historical reasons of the Protestant Reformation, 1517, while they're upset with the Catholics.
Right.
I sympathize. My point is, once they break from the apostolic tradition, now there is no ultimate authority to the church. And so that's why it's been fractured so many
It's
times.
the church of me.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoever's on stage, it's me, baby.
It's exactly
it's Stephen Furtick, baby.
And that's
Joel
why
Osteen.
it's
Give it to me.
Joel Osteen's in the place where the Houston Rockets used to play, because it is entertainment. Christianity now is a form of entertainment, and it has to be an internalized reality, not an entertaining sort of a spectacle. And that's why that sort of commodification and consumerism of religion, I would argue, is feminine. Women are gatherers. They are way more of a consumer than men. And that's why even advertisements themselves, 80% of the ads are directed at women, because women do the majority of the buying, especially in a family. Yeah. And so women are the consumers, and the commodification and the consumerism of America itself is feminine, because a man produces more than he consumes. That's what makes him a man. And that's why he's not a boy, because boys consume more than they produce. And so the way that we are then productive and providers, and then every man does that, not just to society, but then his own family, is that we produce more than we take.
Yeah.
And so we live in such a feminist society that Protestantism, generally speaking, I think, because the lack of traditionality, it isn't real appealing for young men and men, generally speaking.
That's fascinating, because like what happens is, right, when you're in evangelical church, you see the church making money, and you see the pastor making money, and not informing you on how to make money for your family, to provide for the things that you care about the most, which actually brings you to church.
Right.
So it's like, what are we doing here? It's like the evangelical church is the worst at actually providing for the flock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people find is like, and that's where I was like, well, this is not helping me produce anything. This is not helping me take care of myself financially anymore.
Right. And the lack of guidance, right? Paternal guidance is really the satisfaction you'd get of the approval of the older men. It's a sort of approval of the direction of which one person is going, as you were talking about. Look what I've done. Look how I've sort of arrived. And so Protestantism, listen to their sermons. Do they have good things? I mean, I share some of the stuff on my stories. Yeah, there's good tidbits, but the tradition, generally speaking, is sort of aimless, because it's everybody's interpretation of the Bible, and then different translations of the Bible. And so,
and there's definitely a problem.
What is
there's definitely a problem when you can splice together a Stephen Furtick sermon and a Tony Robbins tape, and it sound like it comes from the same person.
Right. Exactly.
That's a problem.
And that's the level they're speaking to. That's not a spiritual reality.
Yeah. And it's funny that like it's still vague as fuck. Tony, if you listen to Tony Robbins on how to make money, you're at the end of it, you're like, I still don't know how to make money.
Right.
Like he didn't tell me anything. He just believe in myself. Yeah, believe in myself, change my state, jump in an ice bath, meditate for this. It's like, you know, and I think that's what happens is like when your church becomes that mega church, it's so hard for people to actually take you serious about wanting and caring for your flock's spiritual growth.
Right.
Because everybody's there, like I said, to provide for their family, to make their life better. And there's a spiritual aspect to that, and then there's a financial aspect to that. And that for so many years of my life, I would hear pastors, misinterpret the Bible and be like, this is the you will have more in your latter rain, like verses like that. And it's like, I will financially bless you beyond your wildest dreams. And it was like always this financial blessing, this prosperity
Yep.
gospel
Yep.
that permeated throughout most of your sermons. And when when the evangelists would come to town, or tent revival, you'd have tent revival, and that's what they were preaching. Either some type of financial prosperity, or if you look at another woman, you are going straight to hell.
Right.
It's either or, and the more you control the thoughts about women in your head, the more money you'll have, because you will be so close to God that He will just bless you, and it just happens. It's just like, this is magic.
Yeah.
What's going on here? But you don't realize it because you connect so much with the Christian story that you're like, well, I have to listen to my elder, which is the pastor. So it's this convoluted system, and it's like getting out is the most productive thing you can do in a way, because you're not
Absolutely.
changing it from the inside out.
Well, you can't, and there's no reason to. I mean, that'd be a fruitless battle anyways.
Right, but we do it with our own family. We're
Well-
like, it's not healthy, but we do it, right? It's like a natural tendency. Well, my mom, what about my brother or my sister? I can help them do this or that. And then, 15 years go by and you're like, oh, nothing changed. I should have just focused on myself and my relationship with God. And
Well, that absolutely is the only thing that I'm a big stickler on this, and some of the messages I try to advise to people is based on my own self experience. The best thing I can do for the people around me is continue to be the best version of myself, and that includes me praying, me taking care of my body, my fitness, taking care of how I speak to people, how I interact, how I look, just being self-conscious. This isn't about being narcissistic or egotistical. It's about, if I make more money, I can help my mom when she gets sick. I can help more people. I can tithe more to my church. I can help grow orthodoxy. And so if we're not going to be monastics, obviously I'm Orthodox. Your example was Protestant, but we need to focus as men becoming the best versions of ourselves. So in regards to controlling our thoughts about women, I don't disagree with that. Is God going to bless you with money? Absolutely not. Those are not correlative. And so,
exactly. But like, as silly as that is, though, to you, right? Within the world of that fundamentalist interpretation, that is truth from the time you're a child to the time where you're like, I don't know, this is killing me. Like, I can't exist in this world anymore. And that's what hurts a lot of people, is like, I was listening to David Bentley Hart talk about the evangelical church, and it's child abuse. I mean, Patrick, every Sunday I had a guy yelling, just yelling damnation, and then at the end, for about 2 minutes, God's grace, come down to the altar. It was a
Right.
altar call. It was I want to work you up, and I'm working myself up. Hallelujah, praise God. And it's like, when you experience that as a child, it is brainwashing in a way, because it's abuse. It's not how a child should be existing as a child.
Right.
And so I have a lot of sympathy for, because I live in LA, a lot of people who grow up in this extremely liberal and detached culture, and they think that a 5-year-old can determine what sex they are.
Yeah.
And
that one's a little bit worse, because it doesn't even have a spiritual reality to it.
True.
And there's no transcendence to it.
True.
That one is even a worse phenomenon than the ancient pagan world, or a Pentecostal or a Buddhist, because the secularist that's totally wrapped up in sort of self-pleasure, they're wrapped in a sort of cocoon of degeneracy and sin that they can be pretty numb to truth, because that's really going to sting once they try to reorient themselves.
Yeah, and it's sad because it's like, okay, you're talking to an adult now. You know, that person, that child that was told by their parents that it was okay to assume that they were the opposite gender of what their biology is, expressing.
Meanwhile, they won't let them dress themselves or feed themselves, or it's
Yeah, and
again,
then
it
now
goes
that
back to
person's
self-pride, because the reason why the parents are doing it are less because of the uh, desires of the child, and I would argue more so because of the social status, especially
exactly.
within elite and polite society, what that does for those parents. And so
Yeah,
it's a sort of narcissism. And it's a narcissism of the parents, which then leads into even a 16-year-old or an adult wanting to transgender. It's a narcissism to the degree that think that God made a mistake with the body that you have. But
right.
if you don't
Yeah,
believe in God and there is no transcendence, then who has ultimate authority? Then I do.
yeah,
And that is then what I argue is the recapitulation of the Luciferian fall, and how Lucifer, the most beautiful and smartest angel, fell to become the entity we refer to as Satan.
right. Yeah, and it's tough to have those conversations with these people who have become adults now. Because all of these presuppositions that this person has that makes them think this way.
Yeah,
you have to go
castrate
through
themselves.
one by one. And you can only do that through a relationship.
Yeah,
You can't have a debate with somebody.
right.
You have to become friends with these people. And I'm a personal trainer out here. I have been for a long time. And I don't have conservative clients. Everybody's a liberal, politically, right? And most are agnostic or atheist, right? But I have been forced to, and also I want to get to know someone with opposing viewpoints and understand why. Because to me, being wrong doesn't sit well, and I don't want to. I don't want to be wrong.
Right.
I really
it's
don't.
like losing to me.
Yeah.
So just as a
And
man,
so when
generally speaking, it's like competitive spirit. I don't want to be wrong. So there's an active sense of trying to figure out what is right and what is true.
Right. And when I see other people who are like so dead set on what I think is just missing the goal, missing the target, it's confusing. Right. And it's also intriguing to me. And I've been able to build amazing relationships with my clients who think absolutely the opposite of me. But I've come to understand a lot of why, they think certain things. And a lot of it's, what is it? Nurture, nature, neighborhood. Right? And it's almost like neighborhood is sometimes more important. So it's like I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. Culture's totally different, right? If you don't go to church on Sunday, that's weird. If you do go to church on Sunday out here, it's like, all right, let's stay away from this person.
Right.
So it's like that whole culture creates a perspective that is, if it's incorporated into your life as a child, it's hard to understand why it's wrong compared to other cultures. And I love those conversations, and I have them all the time. Because you're not really, at the end of the day, you're not going to convince anybody of anything. You can just have a conversation and talk about things, and maybe something you say resonates. But at the end of the day, only that person changes their thoughts, their views, their beliefs. But it's through the relationships that I've built that I've been able to understand them more, and in a way understand what they think they understand about me. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'll give you an example. So I'm from the South. Where are you from?
Indiana.
Got it. My girlfriend's family's from Indiana.
Oh, okay.
And so from the South, there's all kinds of stereotypes about the South, right? Everybody's racist. Everybody's homophobic. Everybody's KKK member, apparently. I know I look like one, but I've never marched. You know, I never put the pointy hat on. Never did it. Never knew anybody that was part of it either. So there's all these stereotypes. The stereotypes are based in truth, right? Stereotypes just don't pop out of nowhere, right? There's an element of truth to all stereotypes.
Right.
And so I move out here to LA. That stereotype was all that they knew.
Right.
And it's like I would try to argue against the stereotype and be like, no, that's not true. And they're like, no. This is what I know from just CNN and MSNBC. So this is the truth. And there was nothing that I could tell them about the South or stereotypes or, crazy Christians in the South that could change their opinion. The only thing that I could do is express myself or my relationship with God through me in my relationship with them.
Sure.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And we've had, when you're training somebody, I don't know if you trained anybody. I know you work out, but I don't know if you ever trained anybody. But
no, I don't train anybody.
When you coach and when you train people, they can be their worst self to you, right? Because they don't want to do it. Right? They don't want to work out. That's why they're paying you. Right?
Right.
And they can be their best self because you push them to a goal and they can be so appreciative and so grateful for achieving a weight loss goal or a muscle building goal or relieving pain, or injury rehab. And so they can't deny how much they love you and appreciate you for helping them. And through that, even though we have opposing viewpoints, they know I care about them.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what, whether they think I'm an ignorant, incest-bred hillbilly from North Carolina who believes in Jesus, who died and rose from the grave, that doesn't matter. Right. I'm not going to change that opinion, but I will let them know how much I care about them in my expression of how I do my job and how in my relationship with them. And that, I didn't realize how important that was.
Yeah, that's orthodoxy is very emphatic about that point that you're making being the ultimate expression of Christianity. And so orthodoxy specifically it makes a point about what we would call personhood theology. And so this is wrapped up. Bear with me, anybody listening. I'm going to use a few fancy terms here, but this has to do with our understanding of our Trinitarian theology and the energy essence distinction. And so one of the things that differentiates orthodoxy from what we would generally call Western Christianity, Catholicism, and Protestantism and every other variation is how do we interact with God? Do we interact with the substance, nature, essence? These are, again, philosophical categories regarding the one and the many, the essence of things, or do we engage with something else? And so Catholic theology has the belief that we engage in a sort of analogy of God, that the love that we encounter is a sort of analogy for the love of God. It's not the exact same thing, and it's not the same thing as his essence. Now, Orthodoxy also claims that we do not know the essence of God. And so that is a big one. That's part of our apophatic sort of mystical theology. But we do engage directly with God through the energies, so through what we would call his uncreated energies, which come through personhood. Only persons can engage with these sort of energetic realities. And so in Orthodoxy, logic, love, reason, compassion, mercy, honor, glory, these are all energetic realities. And the only way they can be experienced or expressed is with energy. And the opposite of these, orthodoxy does not believe there is a positive existence to the opposite. So if truth is an uncreated energy of God, falsehood is not this thing competing with it. Like the law of thermodynamics, falsehood is the absence of that energy. And so coldness is a term we use to describe the absence of thermodynamic energy. There is no such thing as coldness. There's only a situation in which thermodynamic energy is absent. And so that then is also entirely consistent with Orthodox theology and how we understand the uncreated energies of God. And so we then engage with these energies because we're also persons. And so you and I right now have never interacted other than Instagram DM. And so I'm coming to know who you are. You're coming to know who I am, not my essence. Yeah, you don't know the essence of who I am, but you know who I am through the way I speak, the way I dress, the way I move my hands. These are all energetic expressions. So the only way that your personhood knows my personhood is through these energies. And so through your energies, you get a feel, my energies, you get a feel for who I am in essence. And this is how we understand the Trinity, and that it's all through a sort of person to person relation. Our relationship to Christ is personal. Our relationship to the Trinity is a personal relation with each hypostasis, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so in Father Alexander Schmemann talked about how it is a demonic concept to then associate these energies towards abstract things like I love social justice, I love humanity, I love the earth. These energies cannot be engaged on a one-to-one relationship because they're only through person. So the only way love can be expressed is towards another person. The only way compassion can be shown is towards another person. And so the only way Orthodoxy describes is to live out your Christian faith is on a person-to-person level. The only time you can evangelize or missionize is looking in the eyes of another person, because then they're experiencing your energies. And if you then are on the process of theosis and following Christ, you're going to exude the energies of God, which is going to lead them in the right direction.
Dude, it's so funny you said that, because it's like, and this is, obviously this is my experience, but I spent my whole life living moralistically, right? No sex before marriage, that kind of thing, up until like too long. You know what I mean? And when I found theology and philosophy, I just dove in. I consumed, right?
Right.
I couldn't get enough. Can't get enough. Still love it. Still enjoy it, but I understand its place. And then when I had my MDMA therapy session, I had this experience of what actual grace is.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't in here, but it was here.
Right.
Right. And the reasoning that I was grounded in, or that literal interpretation, I had nothing here in the way that I should as a grown man.
Mm-hmm.
And when it hit me, that when I got out of the session, I was like, I've got to look up orthodoxy. And I've been influenced by you and Jay and David Bentley Hart especially. I would love to get your take on David and his work. But I got out of the session. I was like, I have to look up orthodoxy. And I went to Wikipedia. Great source for information. Right. And it spoke about theosis. And I was like, that is what I felt. That's the missing piece to my understanding of my continued growth and relationship with God, is that. And I did not get that in the Pentecostal church.
Right.
Right? Because in the Pentecostal church, I don't know if you've been to any. I would love to see your face.
I've never actually gone to a Pentecostal service, no.
But the expression of speaking in tongues, right, is what they deem as the expression of the Holy Spirit entering you.
Yeah, I'm familiar with their
indwelling in you, right? And so now it gives you a certain strength, a certain confidence in expressing yourself and living your Christian life, right? And I always noticed that it was always the very egotistical and narcissistic people that were always speaking in tongues. You know what I mean?
That's a great thing to find, realize.
And and so, obviously you understand things the older you get, but the thing with MDMA therapy, at least for me, and a lot of people who've done it, is you feel the truth for the first time. You might know it, right? But then in that MDMA therapy session, you feel it. And everything I felt in that session was like, that's orthodoxy.
Yeah,
so when I looked up theosis, and I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And then the essence energies, I was like, oh my God, this this is what I felt in that
Yeah, you
session.
experience it. Yep.
And I
And
think
that's
a lot of
even
people,
truth.
a lot
Go
of
ahead.
Christians and religious people in general have it here, right? And I don't think they have it here as much.
Well, our theology, so you're making, for those, you're pointing to your head and then your heart. We have a different anthropology. So in Orthodoxy, we don't believe in a mind, body, soul in the way that we would understand it. A sort of mind and a sort of disembodied intellect, the body, and then some soul thing, which is like who you are when you're going to die. And somehow all three of these things come together. Orthodoxy has a different anthropology of what we believe to be is the body, soul, and nous. And so the nous is a Greek term that does, if you looked it up right now, we would say equals mind. But the Orthodox Church, in its theological redefining of terms, redefines the nous not just as mind, but as the noetic reality, or the eye of the heart, or the eye of the soul. And so Orthodoxy has a theology that your mind and your ability to perceive truth is related to your morality. And again, these uncreated energies and how many you're actually encountering, because they believe that these energies, being a sort of higher frequency of God, cleanse the noetic perception you have of reality. So the more moral you live your life, the more of God you'll see in the world. The more truth you have, the more aware you will be of, say, the pandemic, and like how to
Right.
navigate that reality. Is that the cleaner your nous is, the eye of your heart, the eye of your soul, the more you can see. And so that's why then the archetype of the evil genius and somebody who has totally blackened their heart and is only functioning in the sort of mind field. And so that's why Orthodox would say that's why they're doing what they're doing. This is why this is a true archetype,
Right.
is because they're actually have a darkened noetic faculty. They may be, quote unquote, the evil genius, but because they're obsessed with pride in the establishment or the manifestation of their own will, they are fall victim archetype, Lucifer, Satan, self-worship, wanting to be your own God. That it's a recapitulation of that exact same thing.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think can get someone from that level of, evil genius or whatever archetype into a
Well,
more
for some people, there's no going back. So
yeah
there's a problematic, there's a heresy known as the apokatastasis, which was a theology of origin, that believed that everything was going to go back to the logos. And this is a Neoplatonic term. Again, the privileging of unity over multiplicity insinuates that all, even the devil, even Satan himself, will eventually come back to God, because everything recapitulates, everything comes back to the one. Well, this is not an Orthodox doctrine. And so we do not believe that everything comes back to the one. Now, everything that is of God comes back to God. And that's then the whole understanding of judgment and the point. And so our understanding the sort of energy essence distinction, Orthodoxy, the way we understand judgment is not having a name on a bouncer's list to make it into heaven. That's not what your judgment is going to look like. Your judgment is based on how many of these uncreated energies, how much of the energy of God is within you. Because if you are filled with the energies of God, when you die, you can't die. And the only way to be filled with those energies is to live a godly life that's following Christ's word and message. And so we believe that God's love is a river of fire. And so if you are repenting and you are trying to work on yourself, God's love is a fire that purifies one's soul. And so you
right.
feel clean, you feel better, you feel a weight lifted off of you. You feel the detritus. Like if you and I are a sword, we are a blade of a sword being put into a fire to cleanse our blade, to make us sharp again.
Right. Yeah.
And
That's a
so,
distinction that us Pentecostals didn't get.
yeah. And, and so you then, that sword is not the same thing as the fire. God's love is the fire. God's love is our ability to engage with these energies.
Mm-hmm.
But if the fire, if the sword is in the fire, the sword becomes the same temperature as the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And that is theosis. That's how we become gods by grace. We are not gods by nature. We are
Right.
not God. But God's love, his fire, divinizes us so that it continually purifies us as long as we repent, and then we can become one with him. Now, we are not the same thing. We are a sword placed into the fire of his love. But if you then are a sword and you pull it out of the fire and you're using it for all these different things, and it becomes dirty and it's filled with detritus, and you love that detritus and you love that filth and you love your sin, you don't want to put that back into God's love because it's going to burn it off, and you don't want it off. And
Yeah.
that is your own damnation. That is your judgment. We are all choosing our judgment right now, because when we engage with God's love right now, we've already decided what's going to happen to us right now. And so
Yeah.
that's just the whole continuation of your life is, are you trying to purify yourself? If you are, then God's love is going to purify you and you'll be one with. But if you love your wealth, or you love yourself, or you love your drugs, or whatever it is, eventually you are going to become separate from God. And so there is a point of no return. So the evil genius, the original point of the question, it depends on each personal situation, because our theology is personable, right? So it's not abstract and it's not general. It's either a universal claim that's true, or it's a person by person basis. And so we would say it depends on how much sin. It depends on how dark that person's heart is.
Yeah.
There's people that are murderers that also can see through that and repent. And Orthodoxy is quite emphatic about the first person in the kingdom was the thief to the right hand of Christ. And so
Right.
he wasn't a Christian his whole life, but the
Yeah.
difference is he recognized God when he saw it. And when he saw him, he submitted to him and he repented. And
Right.
that is the doorway for all of us. But that's the difficulty, is our pride is going to prevent us from repenting. And that's why the way is so narrow.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what David Bentley Hart talked about with people who don't come to Christ, and with their limited understanding and their inability to see certain things that other people would. And do you have any addicts in your family, your friends?
No, I do not.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, man, because
Mm-hmm.
one thing I heard a pastor say: sin is a wound that hasn't been healed.
Yes.
And from my MDMA therapy, I've experienced a healing in a sense, because of the state that you're in, right? Your what is it? Your amygdala, the fear center in the brain.
Yeah, you're talking about during the MDMA experience.
Yeah.
Specifically?
Yeah. So the
Yeah, it's
amygdala
it's
is
definitely
shut
much more
down.
emotional than a traditional psychedelic experience.
Yeah,
So you're
and a
not going to
lot of
get a bunch of
people.
tracers. You may sort of feel
Yeah.
a sort of crystallizing of the perception of light. So light becomes a little sharper, there's a little edge to it when you're high. But the emotional aspect of the MDMA, that is the real part of the phenomenon. And
Yeah.
so my experience is, I personally liked the sassafras, so that's just the MDM without the amphetamine. So MDMA is obviously, it's a mixture of, and so if you ever do get the chance and you're going to do that, now obviously I'm Orthodox, I do not recommend or advise this stuff, but a even pure experience is to just have the MDM or have some sassafras is what it's called. That's what it comes from.
Well, the way you do the therapy is you put a blindfold on for 6 hours,
Okay.
so you can go in. You can go inside into your
Is somebody
psyche.
talking to you?
No.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's what's so fascinating about the MDMA therapy, right?
Mhm.
Is you lay down, you put a blindfold on, and you can't escape the thoughts that are going to come to you, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But for the first time, the fear center of your brain is shut down. So you can access those memories, those events, those traumatic things that have happened to you, and assess them from the deeper wisdom inside of you that you have now as a 32-year-old.
Right.
And so that's what I experienced.
Important part to say, the wisdom does not come from the MDMA.
No.
That's
Not
just
at all.
dissolving boundaries so that you can
Exactly.
experience that
Exactly.
reality from your heart to then encounter
Exactly.
that
So
stuff. That's where
yeah.
I try to tell because obviously in the Christian world that people want to talk about how these substances are demonic, and I do believe they open you up to a reality which you can encounter demons, but the substances themselves are not evil. A mushroom that has psilocybin in it is not some evil thing. Obviously,
Right.
God created it, but yeah, so this I believe the substances themselves are not evil. I believe the dissolution of boundaries is what they're doing, and being very cautious with how you're dissolving your boundaries, because when certain ones are dissolved, you're in a soup with other entities, and it's gonna, if
Yeah.
you don't know how to navigate that, you may bring somebody back with you.
Right. Um, but yeah, so with the MDMA, it's helped so many addicts,
Yes, and
alcoholics,
PTSD.
yeah,
PTSD has had
PTSD,
tons of cases
sexual,
with the MDMA, and then the lower doses of psilocybin.
yeah, sexual
Yeah, but
events
yeah,
like
people
rape.
that have been, yep.
Yeah, people who've been molested, man. I mean, it's just so fascinating, and I understand now. Now that I did it, I get it. Um, and it's funny because like when growing up, you think of people who are like drunks or uh, quote unquote lifetime sinners, or just whoring
Yeah,
around or whatever. And it's
right.
like there's such a childlike understanding of that, and for
Mhm.
a lot of people, it never changes.
Yeah.
But when I experienced the MDMA therapy, I was like, oh, okay, this is how
Yep.
it's helping people. People
Yeah.
who have started drinking because they were molested by their uncle when they were 10, and
Yeah.
and the alcohol was the only thing that self-soothed.
Right. And there's
And
cases
now,
where Timothy
go
Leary
ahead.
talked about the recidivism rate with alcoholics during some research they did in the 60s with LSD. Now, obviously, LSD, different experience than MDMA, but
Yeah,
people would get high on LSD, these people who were longtime alcoholics,
yeah,
and it would dissolve boundaries. And what they would see is not that the LSD cured their alcoholism, it's that they had such a real experience of seeing how they're killing themselves with the alcohol
right,
that they didn't want to kill themselves anymore. And so it
exactly.
scared them in a way sober. And so afterwards, they would have low recidivism rates in regards to drinking alcohol again, not because the LSD cured their desire for it. It's that it allowed them to experience a reality which scared them sober to a degree. So again, that's where
Yeah,
I think, again, it's the dissolving of the boundaries.
yeah,
And I think if people talk about that enough, exactly what these things are doing and how they're having their beneficial and negative consequences on people. What is it that they're doing? They're dissolving cognitive boundaries between you and your neighbor, boundaries between you and your past traumas,
yeah,
uh, psychological boundaries, ego boundaries. And so that's where they can be very beneficial. I think, especially for psychotherapy, um, MDMA specifically, because of its
yeah,
emotionally oriented, experience. It's very conducive to that.
yeah. And the problem with the psychedelic community is they have no ability to have this conversation that you and I are having. Because I feel like the therapy way, the therapist's way, the psychedelic therapist's way of coaching you through these realizations, right, within a psychedelic therapy session is can be less, or it would be less beneficial than having a conversation with someone like you, right?
Well,
And I
I
feel
appreciate
like,
that.
but it's the
Yeah.
theology,
Yeah, no,
right?
I agree. I think that
That's what it
is,
is that they don't have.
yes, I think you're putting your finger right on something very important, is that there is no tradition, right? Psychedelics and the use of psychedelics is within that secular culture that we went back to in regards to the progressive culture that you experience in LA. And so what is the traditional framework? Well, shamanism, Amazonian shamanism. Well, it's Siberian shamanism. It's the peyote cults of Native America, and so then it's wrapped up in a sort of Silicon Valley modernistic
Postmodern,
contemporary culture. I'm sorry, go ahead.
postmodern.
Yeah, postmodern, exactly. It is very postmodern
subjective morality.
because there is no overarching objective truth, and so that's where I
Yeah,
think these can be very dangerous, because if somebody is then going into a psychedelic therapy and they're battling with certain things, and then the person is sort of reifying that they're perfect the way they are, and that their perception and experience of reality is reality itself,
right.
they are going to be lost in a sort of subjective relativistic world, which is the postmodern conundrum, and
Right.
why then people are doing
Yeah.
exactly the things that they're doing. And then the problem with the psychedelics is that they're going to reinforce, if that is the
Mhm.
lens in which you go into the experience with, it's going to reinforce the idea that whatever happens in there, that is the universe speaking to you. That is truth.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a separation between the ways we can understand things to be true and then my personal experience. And there can be overlap, no
Yeah.
doubt,
Yeah.
but they have to also be perceived separately. And I think
Yeah.
that's where, as you're pointing out, a therapist could have somebody sort of go into a more solipsistic result of the psychedelics themselves.
Yeah. And obviously, the different psychedelics are going to be, you know,
Yeah, they all do
the
different
the
things. That's true.
yeah. Like I don't even have the balls to do 5 grams of psilocybin. Like I don't like that. I don't.
It's not
And
for
it's
the
like
timid.
that's why the MDMA was the most beneficial on paper
Yeah.
for,
And
I
you
think,
can
for
maintain your
anybody.
sanity.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I've gone into some of the psychedelic states with such high doses, which again I don't recommend to anybody, but you can't conceptualize what it is that's even happening. Um,
Mm.
and so MDMA, it's gonna be difficult to take so much MDMA you get to a point that you can't conceptualize it. Now
Yeah.
you're bubbling up with
Right.
emotions and energy,
Yeah.
but that's different than like taking a stick, a whole strip of acid,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and getting to a point where like you're looking at things, and they're moving and things are coming alive, and you can't help but look at it, but you also can't think of what you're looking at, and then you can't remember what you just thought about 30
Right.
seconds ago, and so you're just lost in the phenomenology of the present moment.
Yeah.
And
It's
that
funny.
is not. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying. I was like, I had this perception uh, of anyone who smoked weed, right, when we were younger, right, as just dumb, right? If you're and when you're 16 and you are dumb. You are dumber than you are now,
Yeah,
right? At 16. And so for the
no
first
doubt
time
about that.
what's that?
No doubt about that.
Yeah. So when I smoked for the first time when I was 28, that was the realization I had. I was like, oh, weed doesn't make you dumb. Dumb people were smoking weed in high school.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's
Yep.
kind of like that with psychedelics too. It's like a lot of the people that are promoting psychedelic usage with no real grasp of theology and philosophy, well, they're just not the smartest people to be promoting this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And the thing with psychedelics is they're real. And so one of the things I liked about them when I was a non-believer is that people can come up with any ideology or belief system, but take 5 hits of acid. That's not an ideology, that's an experience. And then if
Mm-hmm.
you're interested in quote unquote spiritual experiences, well, there's nothing more spiritual because it provides the experience every time. But
Mm-hmm.
that then gets you back into the what I describe now in my PhD work as a sort of technology of transcendence, the idea that transcendence itself can be sort of engineered by our own ingenuity and our own will, and we can then sort of bootstrap ourselves into our own divinization. And
Right.
that's what transhumanism is, and that's what psychedelics in a way do. And
Yeah.
so it's a very complicated topic, and that's where the Christians who want to dismiss it, you can't also deny some of the clinical research. You can't deny the therapy. That's where this is a very, very nuanced um,
Yeah.
field of discussion that few people, generally speaking, can sort of dip their toes into, because you have to,
Yeah.
one, have done it, and then you have to have read a lot about it
Yeah.
um, to talk about it.
And that's why I appreciate what you do. You talk about it from the background that you have now
Yeah,
as an Orthodox Christian, steeped in the rich theology and philosophy of the church, and understanding all that stuff is obviously what you probably get a lot of emails about and DMs.
Yep.
Because I mean, there's not many people doing what you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Definitely, and nobody in orthodoxy, and so that's what it's kind of put me in a unique position, is that people that have done psychedelics and had positive experiences, if they're gonna cross a bridge into orthodoxy, the bridge that they're gonna cross is probably the bridge that I'm trying to build on my YouTube channel,
yeah, yeah,
because that's the only one that's actually speaking to the experience that even brought them to the place, whether they did, again, MDMA and had a cleansing of their heart
yeah.
and sort of could reappropriate a new perspective and approach to reality. Whatever it is, that's like my whole niche, and I really kind of hammer that home and don't shy away talking about all my psychedelic past or all the drugs I've done. I wasn't into heroin, I wasn't into cocaine. I've done that a few times, but I just wasn't into party drugs. I wasn't into um you know that type of stuff. I was interested in drugs for spirituality, and that drove the entirety of my 20s.
Yeah.
And so, cannabis, and then even today, I'm also very open. Do when I Some of the funnest experiences were being in nature on mushrooms or LSD. Now, my perception of all that stuff, I can look now and see how deluded I was while doing those things and perceiving myself as this sort of self-divinizing process, this bootstrapping that I talked about. I thought I was doing that.
Mm.
Um, but
So when you have
I
those,
still wanna smoke weed. I still am
yeah.
attracted to, MDMA. You're talking about MDMA. Like, never had a negative experience with that. Is it attractive? Yeah. So those temptations, the idea of doing those things as fun things, those are still with me.
So
I don't shy away from talking about that.
do you think that is? I mean, obviously I, you know, growing up in the Pentecostal church, sex is the worst thing that you could ever do. Oh, good God. Oh my God. The only way you make more humans is also the only way straight to hell. Um, but but it's sad because you have a lot of hangups when it comes to sex, and a lot of Pentecostals, a lot of evangelicals have a lot of hangups when it comes to sex. And do you think that because of your extensive usage of psychedelics in like an uncontrolled kind of way, non-therapeutic, with no real guidance, maybe that interest is still there, and that's that kind of like is kind of spurring that on? Because I'm
No,
just saying, because like evangelicals, like
no.
evangelists, most of the evangelists that would come to my church, that's mostly what they would preach against, was sex. And you could tell, oh, that's what they struggle with. You know what I mean? When
Oh,
most
right.
times what people are preaching to others on what to do is the advice they're trying to tell themselves.
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? And a lot of that, for those evangelicals, everybody had their own testimony where they were like, I was a man whore for 30 years. Hallelujah, praise God. And then all of a sudden I had a word from God. It's like I
Wow.
don't think that actually helped you, man. I think you're trying to convince us that it helped you so that you feel better about it. And I get that. You know what I mean? I get that, because we've all got our own thing. And if I would talk to a pastor that I grew up with about healthy sex, I don't think he would have an answer to what that is. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
Sure. I personally don't think it relates to my discussion on drugs, though.
Yeah.
It's a totally different thing.
I'm just saying that because I don't have an experience of like going
Right.
into the
Well,
deep ends of
therapeutic,
the
like you're
well.
talking about doing like stuff with your eyes closed, like putting blindfolds on. I've done a lot of that stuff, and I've got into very deep waters. I mean, my goal was to get as inebriated, and I did both turn off stimulus, so go in silent darkness, black rooms, uh sound deafening headphones, and then a blindfold, and then just allow, whether it be LSD, psilocybin, just to then drive you into sort of deeper realms. It's not even for therapy. So that's the thing, is like, for me,
Mhm.
no way would I even use the substances for perceived therapy now. I just don't have any traumas that I need to get over. The only thing
Got it.
that
Yeah.
is attractive to me is the somatic fun experience of like, hey,
Mm.
man, doing a little MDMA and like hang out with some friends and maybe go to a concert. Like, man, that does still sound fun. So
Yeah.
that's what's interesting to me about it. It's not that I've done very high doses, and I really have no desire to go back to that realm. I don't
Yeah.
want to encounter some of the entities that I, dealt with or experienced with. Um, MDMA certainly is attractive. Smaller doses of LSD or psilocybin certainly is attractive. I haven't done anything since I did an ayahuasca ceremony before I became Orthodox. Um, but smoking weed, I mean, that's still a guilty pleasure. Like once in a while, you're with friends, great sunset, warm outside. I mean, my gosh, I'm not a big drinker myself. So it's like, that's the only thing that would be fun to me if I'm going to get inebriated.
Yeah.
I don't really like alcohol, especially the more you work out. It's like, shit, the more dehydrated it makes me. I don't,
Oh yeah.
smoking a little bit is what I would prefer. But
Yeah.
um, I just see how when I do smoke now, um, it's fun. It's never as fun as it used to be. Every time I do it, I engage with it. It's like, well, maybe for split second, or maybe for a little. It is. You get that brief glimpse of into that sort of excitement that
Hmm.
like you're riding up on the roller coaster, but it's just like the way that I used to do it. I mean, I can't now. The only thing that really gives me fulfillment is something I prayed for a lot during my 20s was clarity on purpose. And
Mm.
so God, through this whole Orthodox thing and this whole transition of my life in the last 5 years, um, he's definitely showed me what it is I'm supposed to do. Like my last ayahuasca experience, I don't think we got into that,
No.
but
Yeah.
the one like I went to at the time I did it, I realized that I couldn't be a university professor, and so I was kind of heartbroken because I was at Berkeley and I was going through this whole ladder: undergraduate, master's, then PhD, and I'm in California and I'm studying psychedelics and I have a thriving psychedelic YouTube channel, and then I'm in Berkeley. I'm in the capital. I'm in the mecca of psychedelic research scholarship. I'm in
Yeah.
the place in the world. And I'm doing it, and I'm doing it. I'm doing a PhD on psychedelics, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow. Um, and then I see all the culture post Trump, because I get there at the beginning of 2017, and so then you see the progressivism. I saw people advocating for minor attracted persons, um, and then you start to change maybe your political values, and then slowly but surely you see how all this stuff is tied together to your presuppositions and all that. But anyways, eventually I came to the realization like a year and a half into my PhD program in California, like I can't be a university professor just because the values that I hold and how I believe men and women should be married, or my beliefs on the nuclear family, or gender. I have to sign a waiver to say that I will not support what I really support to get paid to teach classes at a university. And I just refuse to do that. I saw Berkeley fired John Searle. He's arguably definitely the most famous American philosopher still existing, arguably in the world still living. And they fired him because he asked a 40-some-year-old woman out, and he's in his 70s. He just asked her out on a date, or going out to dinner. I don't even know what the context was, but she claimed it was sexual harassment. And because the whole Me Too era was firing up right around 2017, they fired the most famous tenured professor. He'd been tenured since the 60s at Berkeley. And so it's like, well, shoot, if John Searle can get fired, anybody can get
I
fired.
know I
So
am.
so then it's like I realized I couldn't be a university professor. This whole dream of
Mm.
walking around in my tweed jacket with my briefcase, going to the class I'm getting ready to the lecture at, wasn't going to happen. I was going to have to create something myself, and at the same time, I was now identifying as Christian, and there was a lot of transitions in my life at the time. I was wanting to, not produce all the psychedelic videos I was producing because I didn't believe in them. But at the same time, that's how I made money. That's how I paid my rent. That's how I paid for my
Mm.
groceries, is promoting psychedelics. So I ended up going on this ayahuasca ceremony in Joshua Tree, and the way it worked out for me was I wanted to know, like, what my purpose was, because I felt like my life had just come to a sort of dead end, and I didn't know how I was going to make money, because the YouTube channel that I was using to make money, I didn't really want to do that. This whole career of academia felt like it was coming to an end, and I still had to finish all the intense part of all the research to write the dissertation. And so the psychedelic experience, the ayahuasca ceremony, led to me realizing it validated my journey towards Christ. And it said basically it was time for me to become like Christ, to construct. I needed to become a builder, not a consumer. And that even my old YouTube channel, I was repackaging Terrence McKenna audios, Robert Anton Wilson, Alan Watts, and adding graphics to them, adding very appealing aesthetics to them for people to watch it. So you weren't just listening like most of the YouTube videos, you were actually watching my videos, because there was everything that they're saying. I was going and finding visuals and things to put to it. So um, even that was a kind of consumption, because it wasn't my ideas. I was just using my, at the time, skill sets to edit some videos to
Yeah.
repackage things for other people. And so that was in July of 2019. And so then in September of 2019, I went full time with Church of the Eternal Logos and lived off the money I had saved up. My mom got sick. She's diagnosed with a terminal disease. And so I just moved home, lived off my life savings, and started Church of the Eternal Logos and spent time with her. And that's what I do now. I do all my research remotely. I just buy my books. I buy all my research through the money I make doing my YouTube videos. And that's how I finished my PhD. And that ayahuasca ceremony then was a huge catalyst to doing what I'm doing, because it was the whole point of that thing. And it wasn't it wasn't the ayahuasca that did it for me. I believe the reason why I got the answer to that point is because where I was in my life, that was the only way God would be able to communicate to me and reach me, was if he met me there. And so when he showed me that this is what I needed to do, this is what I needed to devote myself towards, this is how I was going to make money, this is what's going to provide for my family, this is what my career is, and this is what my purpose is, um, the ayahuasca stopped. So I did like 3 cups. I did a 4th cup, and it just, like, once I got that message, like, the drugs didn't even work anymore. Like, it went
Wow.
from full blown visuals to basically sober with a mild buzz. And I was taking more ayahuasca, and so that's why I did Church of Eternal Logos. I've never stopped since then. And I've done
That's
basically
incredible.
3 videos every week since September of 2019.
Wow. So what was the message that you kind of gathered in that session? Like, what was it? Was it like an audible voice, or was it, just this
I don't remember so
aha
much an
moment?
audible voice as, I mean, and when you talk about audible voices, it's like, what sense are you talking about? Because
Right. Yeah.
during those psychedelic experiences, I mean, um, it's like a clear form of communication, but it could be a sort of mental voice. It could be a sort of impression on your heart. The message, I don't remember it being a very super like auditory voice. What I remember is that I had a clear visual that the benefit I had was not being a white man. The way that I was privileged was not being a white man. It was that my grandparents and the parents before them, my parents, my grandparents, their parents, were incredibly moral people. And so you asked me about addiction. I have no instances of like addiction in my family, or like major civil or marital problems or anything like that for multiple generations. And so
Yeah.
the first realization was that um, basically continuing this whole logos thing. At the time I was getting into Jay Dyer and all this stuff, and this was a semester after I had learned all the orthodox theology, and after I had already given my life to Christ.
So way more
I was
informed.
very confused at that point. I wasn't orthodox, right? I was still figuring all this stuff out, but I felt like I believed in Christianity and this whole concept of the logos. And so the first one was my privilege was the morality that has rippled effect through my life, because that is the true stability of
Mm.
why then I'm not dealing with other traumas that other people are dealing with. It's because of the morality, which again is the Christ-centered message, that I'm coming from people who have tried to orient themselves around that to the best of their degree and have established true stability, a true foundation
Wow.
for me to grow.
Yeah.
And that's why then I was actually there doing what I'm doing, and why I can then do and become who it is that God needs me to become. And so that was the first realization, is that the stability and the privilege I had in my life was due to people orienting themselves around traditional Christian morality. And then that it was time for me to transition my life. That I was 29, I was getting ready to be 30 in September of 2019. So I just turned 33. So I was moving from 29 to 30, and I had just ended with my girlfriend at that time. Just there was a lot of moving pieces, and so the message was, well, and was it was time for me to transition from being a sort of boy exploring the world to a man that has a purpose, that has a thing that I have to work at every single day.
Mm.
I have to do something every single day. And that it showed me that the PhD, it's not, yeah, I'm not going to be walking around on college campus like I envisioned this goal that I was working towards. No, I'm going to have to build something on the internet. But all those books, all those experiences, everything I've learned is going to be essential for what it is God needs me to do. And that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. And so um, it was just this emphatic experience that I needed to transition my life, and I needed to become more Christ-like.
Mm.
And doing that was really regarded to taking more responsibility regarding everything in my life, and doing what was on my heart, which was to do the Church of Eternal Logos, which is basically me using Orthodox theology in conjunction with me growing in it myself, and just looking out at the world through the prism of orthodoxy, so that people can then understand what orthodoxy would even say about something. It's not, and that's really what my content is. It's Church of the Eternal Logos. What I'm doing is just providing logos theology on any topic. I was thinking about doing a topic tonight on the archetype of the fool in Kanye West, and talking about what the fool does, or the archetype of the clown, and how they talk about and transgress the boundaries, so then people can see like what the boundaries are of culture and society. And so it's just, that's the type of content I make. God puts it on my heart what I need to make. I don't even know, like, sometimes what streams I'm going to make. I'll just sit down and prepared to work on something and let him tell me what it is. And I hope it's him. I pray, I give everything to him to do. So that's
That's
basically
fascinating, man.
been my journey since that ayahuasca experience. And that's why then, getting back to the psychedelics, is like the purpose thing. I know for a fact I'm doing exactly what I need to do. And so nothing then really makes me feel as whole as working out, reading my books, writing, or making streams, because that's the only thing that's going to get me from point A to point B. That's the only way I'm going to provide for my wife. That's the only way I'm going to build something for my children. And so, even though getting high, smoking weed, doing certain things is still a desire, still a temptation, it's still a fun thing I want to do, I've come to a point in my life, the only thing that really satisfies me, the only thing that really makes me have no anxiety, is to work, and to
Mm.
work on this thing that God's made it very clear for me that I need to work on. And so now I just feel like I have no excuse not to do it. And
That's
so I
amazing,
don't,
man.
I do it.
That's awesome. I love that story. Yeah, I feel very similar to that. Um, yeah, there's certain things that you like. I love conversations. When I was coaching wrestling and talking to my buddy John, who has his doctorate in theology, um, I would leave and I would like, I don't want to stop. I don't want to stop talking about this, And then,
Yeah.
then I learn more about the Platonic dialogues and how important that is, and I think people underestimate conversations, and that's where the majority of my passion is having a conversation with someone I don't know at all, and finding common ground.
Well, it's very Christian. Again, communion is tied to communication, which is
Yeah.
tied to community, which is tied to communion with God itself, because we're using the logos, we're using the word, we're using speech. And so to communicate or have conversations is to insinuate you're doing it with other persons, because who else are you going to communicate with? Because communication is obviously a faculty that comes from being made in the image of God.
Yeah.
So we're using language because we're made in the image. And so it's very Christian thing to be with other people, to talk, to communicate towards important things.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
That's the
Yeah.
thing, is that your chatter can't be noise. It has to be music, and therefore it has to have meaning and intention towards it.
Well, it can be chatter and noise, but it's
It
not
can be,
edifying.
but
You know?
the way we use as Christians, right? So if you're
Right.
engaging with somebody and you're meeting them where they're at, that's one thing. That's still
Yeah, for sure. For
using it
sure.
for music, using
Of
it with
course.
intentionality. I
But
think
there's so much more you can use it for.
yes.
Yeah. It's like, you got a penis, but like just using it all the time with random people is probably not the best usage of it. Right.
Yeah.
But man, that's 2 hours, man. I appreciate talking to you, man. This has been a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate what you do with your channel, man.
Thank you very much.
I really do. I saw something recently where you said something about, I think maybe somebody not liking the idea that you work out.
Well, it's been there's certainly been
hilarious.
critical voices amongst orthodoxy,
Okay.
those that are a little bit more of the ascetic mindset, I would say, that they don't find it very orthodox or quote unquote Christian for me to always tell men to go lift weights. But my and I had recently had a priest on, which backed me up. He's also does bodybuilding and all this different stuff. So there's just people like to criticize in whatever way they can criticize. But a big part of my message is a man's physique, a man's body is something he has total control over. What goes in your body, what comes out of your body, like what you do with it. This is a system that you can choose to regulate just by getting in the right habits. And so if you can take control of your health, then you can take control of all these other things that often have more variables to it. Getting your finances in order involves a lot of other people and a lot of other things, potentially luck in certain times.
Yeah.
Getting your health in order is entirely based on your choices and your own will. And I think if we're going to be traditional men and we're literally moving towards potentially the end times, wherever you think we are on the eschatological timeline, the best thing you can do for the people you love is to be in the best shape, be in the best spiritual relationship with God, and to be constantly growing and learning, because that's how you're going to protect your children. That's how you're going to provide for your family. That's how you're going to be a man. And men protect the perimeter. And the perimeter is our values. The perimeter is our tradition. And so a lot of people don't have tradition. So men don't have anything to protect, and they become feminized consumers. But if you're Orthodox and you're Christian, but if you're especially Orthodox, we have a definitive perimeter that has lasted for the beginning of the church all the way till now. And so it gives you as a man a reason for something to die for other than yourself, is that getting in good shape and learning your theology and getting in touch with Christ, is that you're now part of a tradition that goes all the way back to the apostles. And I can't really think of anything better to potentially die for and defend and protect. I mean, you're in certainly a good host of people.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have anything they die for other than themselves. But yeah, man, as far as like physical training, physical culture, I train a lot of people, and one of the things that keeps people from working out is they don't want to work out like a bodybuilder.
You don't have to.
They find it to be vain. They find it, whatever reason they come up with. And yes, bodybuilding, if you know anyone who is a professional bodybuilder, it's the most selfish sport pretty much you could do.
Right.
But there are other ways to work out. And the thing is, with your body, you want to look at your body and be like, I've built this to do something. Right.
Right.
And I find, in the wrestling community, you create a body type. Your body morphs into the shape that you play.
Right.
And when you look in the mirror and your shoulders are pronated and you're just locked in like this, you're like, you know what? I could take on anybody that, because I've taken the shape of this sport. And that's a confidence. A lot of jiu-jitsu guys have that confidence too. It's
Yep.
like my body has taken the shape of this thing that I can now do.
Yep.
And I always, when I find people, my buddies who are trainers who just bodybuild, I try to, expand their knowledge on other ways to work out, to
Sure.
understand the potential that their body can do.
Yeah.
And everybody's got one thing that they really like to do, and they gotta find. You gotta discover it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I try to tell people is,
as a personal trainer, that's what I do for my clients. Is I help them
Yeah.
discover the activity that makes them feel embodied. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. It's what your thing is. I try to show guys how to build muscle tissue. Doesn't mean you have to be a bodybuilder, but certainly incorporating bodybuilding exercises and just building the basis, the foundation of your body. Okay, maybe you're into HIIT training, maybe you're into CrossFit, maybe you're into powerlifting stuff, maybe you're into body weight exercises, maybe you're into kettlebells, whatever. All that stuff's good. The point is, I'm a big advocate for becoming physical as a man, and then martial arts too. Like martial arts is essential in regards to just being able to have the edge to protect somebody. It's not that we're going out there to kick butt. It's that we're Christian men. So now we have a perimeter. We need to be defensive. It's not we're on the attack. It's that we just have to be able to stand ground. And so my thing is I love hypertrophy lifting.
Yeah.
I love pump. And so that's my thing. I don't tell everybody in regards to my advocacy for physical fitness to do that, hypertrophy style lifting. That's just what I'm into. But you got to find what you're into. Maybe you're into long distance running. That's good for you too. Now, I hate it. I hate running, especially for long distances. Unless I'm like a dog, unless there's a ball, I don't want to run. Like I'll run after a ball, give me a football or a basketball or a baseball. I'll go run then.
Yeah.
But I need a ball just to run. I hate doing that.
Right. I get it, man. Everybody's got their thing, man. Well, dude, I appreciate this. This was so much fun, man. And I'm a real big advocate for what you're doing with your channel.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that.
And I wish you the best, man. I really do, because man, there's people out there starving for this conversation, and I think you do it the best, man. Like straight up. I really, I don't know why, man, but I gravitate to the presentation that your presentation, the way you talk about things, man. I really do, man. And I think us as men
it's
need
conscious. I really appreciate you saying that, just because it is something I'm very conscious of everything I try to do. I mean, obviously everything's not scripted, but my goal in my content is no matter what level somebody is, whether they're just getting into whatever topic I'm talking about, or they're already knowledgeable about it, there's something for them. I'm speaking to them and I can maintain their interest level. And so, I appreciate you talking about that or mentioning that. I really appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, I mean, I had a toxic relationship with older men when I was younger, and I've come to realize that men are our greatest allies and our greatest enemies.
Yeah,
and we got to support each other, And this scarcity mindset, or whatever you want to call it, my ego against your ego, it's not Christian.
No, it's not.
So,
but strong men are definitely Christian. I think it's a really interesting thing that, at least I've noticed, the majority of gyms you go to, if you find power lifters and bodybuilders, a vast majority of them are Christian.
Yeah. So wrestlers
there's
too.
something about Christianity and men wanting to like push themselves through personal excellence to a very significant degree. And so, I can certainly resonate that, and I like that. But, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity, and God bless everybody listening.
One last thought. Could you imagine a UFC champion winning the belt and being like, I just want to thank nobody because I'm an atheist? Nobody does. Nobody in combat sports is like that, man. Like in wrestling,
Right.
even the great Russian wrestlers, great Iranian wrestlers, they're religious.
Yep.
It's pretty across the board when it
I
comes
mean,
to
if you're
that
going to push
physical
yourself
combat.
to a significant degree as a man, that involves the possibility of death.
Yes.
And so you're going to have to have already like mentally conquered that fear.
Yes.
And so you're going to then thereby most likely be spiritual or religious. Spirituality, again, I think is kind of a dumb term, but in the way that is properly used as a sort of personal disposition towards transcendent things, they're either going to be spiritual or religious, because that's the only thing that's going to give them the confidence that to conquer potential death, but also that they may potentially die.
And it helps you live better.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about that.
Getting over that fear of death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, brother, man, I appreciate this. This was so much fun, dude. We'll have to do it again eventually when we have something else to talk about, because we obviously ran out of things to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. I'll let you go. This was great.
All right. Thank you, brother. God bless.
Absolutely.